Forget everything Hollywood showed you. The gold rush wasn't adventure. It wasn't freedom. It wasn't men in clean hats striking it rich under a golden sun. It was mud. It was blood. It was a slow death that smelled like rot and gunpowder and unwashed bodies packed together in a canvas tent the size of a closet. Imagine you left your family, sold everything you owned, walked 2,000 miles on foot, and arrived somewhere that looked like the inside of a nightmare. That's what the mining camps really were, and I promise you, it's going to get uncomfortable. Here are 20 cruel truths about life in the mining camps of the 1800s. By the time we get to number 1, something you believed about the American West will be dead. Number 20. The lie that started everything. Someone struck gold in California in 1848. The newspapers ran with it. By the time the story reached the East Coast, it had been stretched, twisted, and sold like a carnival ticket. Gold lying on the ground, fortunes made in a single afternoon. Any man willing to work will get rich. It was fiction. Profitable fiction. For the newspapers, for the steamship companies, for the men selling shovels and picks at 10 times the normal price. By 1849, over 300,000 men had abandoned their lives chasing that story. Most of them would never find enough gold to cover what they spent getting there. The lie didn't just move west with them. It was the foundation everything else was built on. Subscribe to History in the Mud, where every video exposes what the history books left out. Number 19. The cost of getting there. Before a single man touched a pan to a river, he was already ruined. The journey to California from the East Coast cost roughly $400 to $600 in 1849. That's the equivalent of over $15,000 today. Most men spent every cent they had and borrowed the rest. The overland trail took 5 to 6 months. Men walked most of it. Shoes disintegrated after the first month. Feet cracked open and bled into the dust. The sea route around Cape Horn took even longer. 6 months on a ship where disease spread in the sleeping quarters like smoke through a room. And if you chose the shortcut through Panama, malaria was waiting for you in the jungle. 1 in 5 men who took that route died before they ever saw California. You paid to get there. You paid with money, you paid with your body. And that was before the real suffering started. Number 18. The price of a shovel. You made it. You're standing in camp. You need tools. A shovel that cost 75 cents in Missouri cost $10 in the California mining camps. A simple iron pan, $8. A pickaxe, $15. Boots, $30 to $40, if you could find a pair that fit. A merchant named Samuel Brannan bought up every shovel and pick in San Francisco the moment he heard about the gold strike. Then he stood in the street waving a bottle of gold dust and screamed that gold had been found. He didn't mine a single ounce himself. He made $36,000 in 9 weeks, selling tools to the men who did. The men digging in the rivers? Most of them worked for weeks to afford the equipment that let them work. They came to find gold. They found debt first. Number 17. What a mining camp actually looked like. Forget the wooden storefronts. Forget the saloon with the swinging doors and the piano player. Most mining camps were canvas. Tents stretched over wooden frames, packed so close together you could hear the man next to you breathing. When it rained, the canvas sagged and dripped. When the sun hit it, the temperature inside rose to unbearable. The ground was mud, always mud. Mud that sucked the boots off your feet, mud that got into food, into water, into open cuts. There was no sewage system. Men used the edges of camp, or the river itself, the same river they drank from and panned in. One diary entry from 1850 described the camp smell as a mixture of smoke, human filth, and something sweet and rotten that I later understood was scurvy, making a man's body dissolve from the inside. That's where these men lived. That's where they slept. That's what they breathed every single day. Number 16. The water that ate your lungs. But it gets worse. The rivers weren't just dirty. The mining process made them poisonous. Hydraulic mining, blasting hillsides with high-pressure water, released mercury, arsenic, and other heavy metals directly into the water supply. Miners used liquid mercury themselves to separate gold from sediment, then poured the waste back into the streams. Men drank from those streams. Mercury poisoning is not quick. It's not clean. It starts with tremors in the hands. Then it moves to the mind, confusion, paranoia, violent mood swings. Miners called it the mining shakes and assumed it was fatigue. It wasn't fatigue. Some camps downstream had contamination levels that modern scientists, studying the sediment today, describe as catastrophic. The rivers didn't recover for decades. The men who drank from them didn't recover at all. Number 15. The whiskey that could blind you. Water could kill you slowly, so men drank whiskey instead. The problem was that real whiskey was expensive. Camp merchants, and the word merchant is generous, sold something called rot gut. It was watered-down grain alcohol mixed with tobacco, pepper, and occasionally laudanum to give it a kick. Some batches contained methanol. Methanol is not ethanol. Your body cannot process it. It attacks the optic nerve first. Men went blind. Suddenly, completely blind, waking up one morning and finding the world had gone black overnight. One account from a Nevada mining camp in 1859 describes 3 men losing their sight in a single week from the same barrel of whiskey. The merchant was run out of camp at gunpoint. The next merchant sold the same product at a higher price, because what were they going to do? Stop drinking? Number 14. The food that wasn't food. And that's where the real hell begins. The mining camp diet was not a diet. It was barely survival. Hardtack, dense crackers made of flour, water, and salt, was a staple. It lasted forever because nothing alive wanted to eat it either. Miners soaked it in water to soften it. They fried it in lard. They ate it plain with the consistency of wet concrete. Beans were boiled until they were grey. Salt pork that had been preserved so long it had crystallized. Coffee that was re-boiled until it tasted like metal. Fresh vegetables were nearly non-existent. Fresh meat was a luxury. Fruit was a rumor. The result was scurvy. Vitamin C deficiency causes the body to literally come apart at the seams. Old wounds reopen, teeth loosen and fall out, gums blacken and bleed. The skin bruises from the lightest touch. Miners in California camps in the early 1850s described pulling their own teeth with pliers because the pain of letting them hang was worse than the extraction. They were dissolving, slowly, and they kept digging. No. 13. The doctor who made things worse. If you were sick, you needed a doctor. The doctors in mining camps were, in many cases, catastrophically unqualified. There was no medical licensing board in most territories, Any man with a bag and a confident expression could call himself a doctor. Some had genuine training. Many had read one medical pamphlet on a 6-month boat ride and decided that was enough. The treatments were often more dangerous than the disease. Bloodletting was still common practice, slicing open a vein to release bad humors from a body already weakened by malnutrition and exposure. Calomel, a mercury-based compound, was prescribed for almost everything: fevers, infections, stomach pain. It caused mercury poisoning. One miner's diary from 1852 reads, "The doctor came. He bled James and gave him powders. James is worse now than before. I think the doctor may kill him by Thursday." James did not make it to Thursday. Number 12. The injury there was no recovery from. Mining was one of the most physically destructive occupations in human history. Cave-ins were constant. The tunnels men dug were unstable, poorly reinforced, and extended far beyond what the geology could support. Men were buried alive on a weekly basis in active camps. Those who survived being buried often weren't grateful for long. Crushed hands, broken backs, legs pinned under rock and cut off by fellow miners, without anesthesia, to free the man before the rest of the tunnel came down. Hydraulic mining through boulders at high speed. One moment you were standing at a sluice box, the next, something the size of a wheel hit you at full force. There was no workers' compensation. There was no disability. There was no one to sue. If you couldn't work, you couldn't eat. Most men who suffered serious injury simply disappeared, into debt, into charity, into early graves dug by the men who replaced them. Number 11. The sleeping arrangements. But it gets worse. When men weren't dying at the mine, they were packed into sleeping quarters that accelerated every disease the camp already had. Bunks were stacked 3 high in canvas structures housing 20 to 40 men. The blankets were rarely washed. The men were almost never washed. Body lice were so universal that miners stopped mentioning them in their diaries the same way they stopped mentioning mud. It was just the texture of life. Tuberculosis moved through these sleeping quarters like wind through a screen door. One infected man in a tent of 30 men was a sentence for everyone around him. Cholera was worse. Cholera moves fast. A man could be healthy in the morning and dead by midnight, his body emptied of every fluid it contained. In the crowded, sanitation-free environment of a mining camp, it didn't stop with one man. The 1850 cholera outbreak along the Overland Trail killed thousands. Men on the trail could navigate by the freshly dug graves on either side of the path. Number 10. The violence that wasn't what you think. Here's what Hollywood got wrong about mining camp violence. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't 2 men in the street at high noon. Most of the violence was small, stupid, and brutal. A man was stabbed over a card game debt of $2. Another was beaten to death with a pick handle because he was accused of jumping another man's claim, a claim that turned out to be worthless anyway. Alcohol was the engine of most of it. Men with nothing to do after dark, no women, no families, no community structure, just whiskey and frustration and the rage of knowing that the dream they crossed a continent for was not coming true. San Francisco's Sydney Town District was described in an 1851 newspaper as a place where a man might be robbed, stabbed, or simply disappear, and no one would ask questions because no one wished to be asked questions themselves. The law was whoever had the most men willing to back him up. Justice was whatever the loudest voice decided it was. Number 9. What happened to the men who actually found gold? Let's talk about the men who struck it. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Finding gold didn't mean keeping it. The moment word spread that a man had made a significant find, he became a target. He was overcharged at every merchant. He was cheated at cards. He was robbed on the trail home. He was sued by men claiming prior rights to his claim. And if he made it home? Studies of the 49ers, the men who came to California in 1849, found that the majority who returned east came back with less money than they left with, after accounting for the cost of the journey and supplies. Of the men who did profit, a disproportionate number had their fortunes consumed by lawyers fighting claim disputes, by new ventures that failed, or simply by years of drinking and spending with no sense of how to manage what they'd found. James Marshall found gold at Sutter's Mill. He died in 1885, penniless and bitter, spending his last years charging admission for people to hear him tell the story of the discovery that made everyone else rich. He got a monument. He didn't get the money. Number 8. The women who were there. The mining camps are always told as a man's story. That's the first lie. Women were there. Not many, but they were there. Some came as wives, dragged west by husbands who had been consumed by gold fever. They cooked, washed, hauled water, and gave birth in canvas tents while their husbands dug holes in the ground. Some came as entrepreneurs, women who ran boarding houses, laundries, and restaurants in mining camps, often made more money than the miners themselves. A woman named Mary Ellen Pleasant arrived in San Francisco in 1852 and built a business empire through cooking, investing, and operating boarding houses. She became one of the wealthiest Black Americans of the 19th century, in a state that had just banned black testimony in court. And some women were there because they had no other option, trapped in a system of entertainment that mining camp operators ran like an industry, importing women from China, South America, and Mexico under conditions that were indistinguishable from slavery. Their stories were rarely written down. Their names are mostly gone. The history books kept the men. The camps kept the women quiet. Number 7. What happened to the land's original people? And that's where the real hell begins. The California Gold Rush initiated one of the most rapid and systematic destructions of an indigenous population in American history. And almost no one talks about it in the Gold Rush context. In 1848, California's native population was estimated at around 150,000. By 1870, it had dropped to approximately 30,000. Miners drove tribes from their land without hesitation. The California state government paid bounties for Native American scalps. Entire villages were massacred for being near a productive mining area. The Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, passed in California in 1850, was not protection. It legalized the forced labor of Native people and allowed white settlers to indenture Native children with or without parental consent. The word genocide was not used at the time. Historians use it now. The Gold Rush mythology, the adventure, the freedom, the American dream, was built directly on top of this. The ground itself was soaked in it. Every gold coin minted from California ore passed through hands that were, at some point, stained. Number 6. The Chinese miners and the violence against them. By the early 1850s, Chinese miners had become essential to California's gold fields. They were methodical, organized, and willing to work claims that other miners had abandoned as depleted. They were also despised for it. In 1852, California passed the Foreign Miners Tax, a monthly fee levied specifically to drive out Chinese workers. When the tax didn't work, violence did. Chinese miners were beaten, robbed, and murdered with near-total impunity. Courts in California did not accept testimony from Chinese witnesses. That meant a Chinese man who watched his partner get killed could not legally identify the killer in court. The killers knew this. They acted accordingly. Entire Chinese mining settlements were burned to the ground. Some attacks were carried out by mobs of hundreds. The newspapers often described these events as disturbances, or occasionally didn't describe them at all. The gold these men found flowed into an economy that was actively trying to destroy them. Number 5. The psychological collapse. But it gets worse. Historians studying the diaries and letters of mining camp residents have identified a consistent psychological arc. Month 1. Excitement, determination, absolute certainty that fortune is coming. Month 3. Frustration, but the belief is still there, just a little longer. Month 6. The diaries change tone. The language becomes flat. Men stop describing their surroundings. They stop writing about home. The entries get shorter. Month 9 and beyond. Some men stopped writing entirely. Others wrote things that suggest a complete break from the self they had been before they left. One miner wrote in his diary in 1851, "I no longer know what I am doing here. I continue to dig because stopping would mean admitting something I cannot yet name." Historians call this the California syndrome. Men who had been farmers, teachers, and family men became unrecognizable. To their families when they returned, and to themselves in the mirror. The dream didn't just fail, it hollowed people out. Number 4. The children. There were children in the camps. That fact alone should sit uncomfortable. Some came with their families on the overland journey, children who walked 2,000 miles. Children who watched parents die of cholera on the trail and kept walking because there was no other choice. In the camps themselves, children worked. A boy old enough to carry a bucket carried buckets. A child old enough to sort rock sorted rock. This was not considered unusual. This was considered contribution. The mortality rate for children in mining camp conditions, contaminated water, disease, malnutrition, physical danger, was devastating. One study of overland trail records found that children under 5 were disproportionately represented in trail deaths, their bodies less able to withstand the cholera and dysentery that swept through parties. But here is the detail that doesn't let go. Some children became orphaned mid-journey and were taken in by strangers heading the same direction. They arrived in California with no family, no documentation, no legal identity. They simply became part of the camp, absorbed into labor, invisible to any record. They came west as children. They became ghosts. Number 3. The ones who never came home. By the mid-1850s, letters had stopped arriving at certain addresses back east. Not because the men were dead, though many were, but because some men simply chose not to return. They had been gone so long. They had seen too much. They had failed in ways that felt permanent. The idea of going home, to a wife, to children, to a town that remembered them as they were, was more frightening than staying. Some drifted into other camps, other territories, other names. Men reinvented themselves in the West with a frequency that stunned Eastern observers. A man could simply become someone else. No records, no history, no accountability. Others stayed and built something, not from gold, but from the businesses that served the gold seekers. Merchants, saloon keepers, brothel operators, lawyers. The men who understood that the real fortune wasn't underground. And some, a number that will never be accurately counted, simply vanished into the desert, into unmarked graves, into the margins of history. Their families waited. Some waited for decades. A few women didn't remarry until their husbands had been legally declared dead, which required years of absence and a court process most rural families didn't know how to navigate. They wrote letters to a West that had already swallowed their men whole. Number 2. What the gold rush actually built. Here is the uncomfortable truth that rewrites everything. The gold rush built California. That part is true. San Francisco went from a small settlement of about 1,000 people in 1848 to a city of 25,000 by 1850. Infrastructure, banking, law, commerce, all of it exploded. But here's what it was built on. The fortunes that actually lasted came from supplying miners, not from mining. Levi Strauss made denim pants. Wells Fargo moved money. Leland Stanford, one of the men who built the Transcontinental Railroad, made his first fortune as a Sacramento merchant selling supplies to miners. These men became the aristocracy of California. They built the universities, the railroads, the banks. Their names are on buildings today. The miners who made it all possible, who created the demand, who died in the tunnels, who poisoned the rivers, who displaced and destroyed the people who lived there first, those men are largely anonymous. They are the unnamed mass who made a small number of other men extraordinarily rich. That is not a frontier myth. That is capitalism operating exactly as designed. And the men who went west dreaming of freedom were, in the end, the fuel. Number 1. The truth about the American dream. This is the one. The gold rush was the first mass marketing of the American dream. The idea that any man, through hard work and courage, could transform his fate. It was the blueprint. It was tested in California, and when it worked, when enough people believed it to make others rich, it was deployed again and again. The Homestead Acts, the land booms, the oil fields, the stock markets, the dot-com rush, the crypto wave. The structure is always the same. A small group of people have access to something: land, information, infrastructure, capital. They need a large group of people to animate it, to do the physical and financial labor that makes it valuable. So they sell a story about opportunity, about freedom, about what's possible for anyone willing to work hard enough. Most people who chase it will lose. The structure guarantees it. Not everyone can strike gold. There isn't enough gold. Not every startup can be worth $1 billion. The math does not allow it. But the dream has to feel possible. It has to feel personal. It has to feel like the people who didn't make it simply didn't want it enough, didn't work hard enough, weren't brave enough. That's what keeps the next wave coming. The men in the mining camps of the 1800s didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because they were necessary. Necessary to the enrichment of people who never once touched a shovel. They went west to find freedom. They found the machine that consumes it. There's a photograph, one of the earliest taken in a California mining camp, around 1852. A group of men standing in a muddy riverbed. They're not smiling. Cameras took too long to expose for smiling. But even accounting for that, their faces are something else. Emptied out. Present, but somewhere else. They were sold a story. They paid everything to chase it. And somewhere between Missouri and the Sierra Nevada, the story and the man who believed it separated from each other. Most of those men are completely unknown today. No names, no graves, no record of what they gave. What is left is the gold, sitting in vaults, on fingers, in museums. The men who pulled it from the earth got almost none of it. Ask yourself this. If they could see the world that gold built, the railroads, the cities, the dynasties, would they feel like they were part of it? Or would they feel exactly like what they were?